I refused their demand to hand over my house. My father-in-law swung a heavy brass centerpiece at my head, knocking me unconscious on the spot. They had no idea her fiancé would soon grab the microphone and expose a secret that destroyed them all. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever stood up to toxic family. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and I am a boutique real estate developer. I thought I had married into a family of grace, but I was incredibly wrong. The VIP bridal suite at the St. Regis Hotel was a vision of absolute luxury. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching the crystal facets of massive chandeliers. Orchids spilled from vases, filling the room with a suffocating sweet fragrance that clung to everything. The heavy mahogany doors were shut tight, locking me inside with the three people about to show their true colors. I stood in the center of the plush suite, smoothing front of my midnight blue silk dress. My husband Julian paced back and forth across the thick carpet like a caged animal. He was dressed in a tuxedo, looking every bit the successful financial executive he claimed to be. But the expression on his face was anything but handsome. It was twisted with a frantic, ugly desperation that I had never seen before. Sitting on the sofa was my sister-in-law, Chloe. She was 28, the undisputed golden child of the family, and today was supposed to be her perfect wedding day. She wore a custom Vera Wang gown that easily cost more than a luxury car. Yet instead of glowing with bridal joy, she was weeping hysterically. Her face was red with genuine fury as she clutched a glass of champagne. Standing over her shooting daggers at me was my father-in-law, Winston. He was 60 years old, a towering figure in the Atlanta high society scene, always projecting an image of extreme wealth and power. Today, his charming facade had completely evaporated. He looked at me not like a daughter-in-law, but like an obstacle in the way of his family's triumph. Winston reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a folded legal document, and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table with a sharp crack. I looked down. It was a quitclaim deed. "Sign it right now," Winston demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. "We are running out of time." I stared at the paper, my heart pounding. The document legally transferred ownership of my custom-built smart home in Buckhead directly to Chloe. I had spent 3 years pouring sweat and savings into developing that property. It was my masterpiece, valued at over $900,000. I bought the land before I met Julian and funded the construction through my boutique real estate firm. It was my property. "What is this?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sob. "You know exactly what it is, Nia. Desmond's mother wants to see the deed. She wants proof." Desmond was Chloe's fiancé. He came from genuine generational wealth, old money, that made Winston's country club lifestyle look like a cheap imitation. His family was incredibly protective of their assets. Julian pointed at me. "I told Desmond's family we were gifting Chloe the Buckhead estate as a wedding present. His mother asked for the paperwork this morning. She refuses to let Desmond sign the marriage license without seeing proof our family brings equal value to this union. You need to sign the house over to Chloe so we can show them the deed." I looked at my husband in absolute disbelief. "You promised her my house. A house you have absolutely zero financial stake in. A house you did not contribute a single dollar toward." "It is not just your house," Julian snapped, closing the distance between us. "We are married. What belongs to you belongs to this family. You are making us look like liars, Nia. You are jeopardizing the most important day of my sister's life." I shook my head, feeling a cold, hard knot form in the pit of my stomach as I processed their words. The sheer audacity of their demand was absolutely breathtaking. They had always treated me like an outsider, subtly mocking my working-class background and my self-made success at every family gathering. Now, they were literally trying to steal my most valuable physical asset just to buy their way into a profoundly wealthy family without lifting a single finger themselves. "I am not signing anything," I said, making sure each word was sharp and clear. "I am not giving away a $900,000 property just so you can play pretend with Desmond's family. If you wanted to give your sister a mansion, Julian, you should have bought one yourself." Winston's face turned purple. "You selfish girl," he spat. "We gave you our name. You have no idea how things work at this level. This is about Black excellence and preserving our image. Desmond's family is royalty in this city. This marriage elevates us. But you will always be that small-minded girl with no pedigree. Julian grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. You are going to pick up that pen and sign the paper, Nia. Do not be a stereotypical angry outsider right now. Do not ruin this for us. I already told them the house was hers. If you do not sign it, you are going to humiliate me. You are going to humiliate all of us. I yanked my arm out of his grasp, feeling a wave of pure disgust wash over me. I finally saw my husband for exactly who he was. A fragile, empty man hiding behind expensive suits and his father's reputation. He did not love me. He loved what my hard work could do for his image. Your humiliation is your own problem, Julian, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I am done being the bank for this family. I am done letting you use my achievements to mask your insecurities. The answer is no. Now I am leaving. I turned my back on them and began walking toward the heavy mahogany doors. I just wanted to get out of that beautiful, suffocating room. I wanted to leave the hotel, call my lawyer, and figure out how quickly I could file for divorce. I never saw him move. Enraged by my absolute defiance and the crumbling of his grand illusion, Winston lost his mind. He lunged across the room. He grabbed a heavy, solid brass floral centerpiece from a side table. The sudden impact was absolutely deafening. A blinding flash of light exploded behind my eyes as the solid brass struck my head with violent force. The pain was instant and agonizing, radiating down my neck like hot lightning. My knees buckled immediately under the unexpected blow. I could not brace myself. I hit the floor hard, my cheeks slamming brutally against the hotel carpet. A sharp, high-pitched ringing immediately filled my ears. My vision swam, the bright colors of the room blurring into a messy, sickening swirl. I felt a warm, thick liquid sliding down the back of my neck, soaking into the collar of my silk dress. I tried to speak, tried to scream for help, but my body refused to obey. I was completely and utterly paralyzed by the shock and the trauma of the blow. Through my fading consciousness, I heard the sound of the suite door opening. High heels clicked rapidly across the floor. It was my mother-in-law, Vivian. She had just walked in. I just lay there bleeding onto the floor, praying she would call for an ambulance. Instead, Vivian's voice floated down to me, completely devoid of empathy. She sounded annoyed, as if I had merely spilled a drink. "Get a towel quickly," Vivian whispered harshly. "Do not let her bleed on Chloe's Vera Wang dress. Drag her to the side. Desmond's family is waiting out there and we cannot afford any delays. Clean this up now." No one rushed forward to check my pulse. No one called out for any kind of emergency medical help. My life meant absolutely nothing compared to their precious reputation and this ridiculous wedding. I was just a messy inconvenience to be hidden away so they could confidently continue their perfect, fabricated, wealthy charade. As the shockingly heavy brass centerpiece was carelessly tossed aside and a dark towel was thrown roughly over my bleeding head, the terrifying darkness finally rushed in, completely overwhelming my senses, and I quickly lost my fading consciousness entirely. The sterile glare of fluorescent lights dragged me back into consciousness. I opened my eyes, wincing as sharp pain shot through the back of my skull. The smell of strong antiseptic filled my nostrils, replacing the cloying scent of orchids from the bridal suite. I tried to sit up, but nausea forced me back against the stiff hospital mattress. My hand instinctively reached for the agony, fingers brushing against a thick gauze pad taped securely to my scalp. A passing nurse noticed I was awake and quickly approached. She checked my vitals and softly informed me I was in the emergency room. I had sustained a severe concussion and required 4 stitches to close the laceration. Paramedics brought me in after an anonymous call from the hotel. I turned my head slowly, fighting the room's spin, and surveyed my surroundings. The visitor chair was empty. There was no pacing husband checking his watch. There were no in-laws wringing their hands in guilt or offering tearful apologies. I was alone. Julian had let me be loaded into an ambulance like luggage while he stayed behind to drink champagne and celebrate his sister. My husband did not bother to ride with me to ensure I survived the trauma his father inflicted. The profound isolation of that hospital room stripped away the last lingering illusion of my marriage. I was not a cherished wife. I was a resource they had finally exhausted. My clutch sat on a small table near the foot of the bed. I forced myself upright, gritting my teeth against the pounding skull, and reached for it. My hands trembled from shock and adrenaline. I grabbed my phone. The screen lit up with notifications. My heart gave a pathetic flutter when I saw Julian's name on the screen. A part of me, the naive girl who had fallen in love 5 years ago, hoped for an apology. I hoped he would say he was on his way. I opened the message. The words were so cruel and devoid of empathy that I read them 3 times to be sure my concussed brain was comprehending them correctly. Tell the doctors you tripped on your heels. Do not ruin Chloe's day. We are at the reception. There was no question about my health. There was no inquiry if I was conscious bleeding or severely injured. His only concern was protecting his father from a felony assault charge and ensuring the high society facade of his sister's wedding remained intact. He wanted me to lie to medical professionals, covering up a violent crime, all so they could continue eating caviar and dancing to a jazz band. I stared at the screen until the messages blurred together. A strange sensation washed over me. I expected to cry. I expected to feel the tears of a heartbroken wife whose world had just shattered. But my eyes remained completely dry. The well of grief was empty. Instead, a freezing absolute calm settled deep into my bones. I locked my phone, feeling my remaining affection for Julian wither and die instantly. Just as I placed the phone down, another notification chimed loudly. It was a high-priority alert from my business banking app. My brow furrowed. I set up strict alerts for any transactions exceeding $10,000 on my corporate accounts. I swiped the notification open and stared at the ledger. My breath hitched in my throat. My business line of credit was accessed just hours ago, right around the time I was loaded into the ambulance. The withdrawal was massive. $150,000 was drained in a single swift transfer. I tapped furiously on the screen, tracking the routing numbers and the destination of the funds. The money had not been moved to a corporate vendor for my firm. It had been funneled directly into a joint checking account Julian and I rarely used, and from there, rapidly dispersed to various local businesses. I recognized the merchant names immediately on the screen. They were the premier event planners, the luxury florists, the high-end catering companies, and the venue hosting Chloe's reception. My mind raced as I pieced the horrifying puzzle together. Julian had utilized his emergency access to my business line of credit. I granted him that access 2 years ago when he claimed his mother needed emergency surgery. He weaponized my trust and my hard-earned business capital to pay off the remaining balances for his sister's lavish wedding vendors, the wedding he and his father had just tried to force me to fund with my house. When I refused to sign over the $900,000 property, Julian simply stole the cash equivalent to ensure the wedding proceeded without a hitch. He robbed me while I was bleeding on the floor. The audacity was staggering. He had stolen $150,000 from my company to pay for the party he was currently attending, the same party he commanded me not to ruin. I was funding the celebration of my own attempted murder. I closed the banking app. The coldness inside me solidified into something hard and unbreakable. I did not panic. I did not scream. I systematically opened my contact list and dialed the one person who could match my newfound ruthlessness. 20 minutes later, the double doors of the emergency room swung open with such violent force that a passing orderly jumped out of the way. Tara marched down the sterile corridor, her heels clicking aggressively against the linoleum floor. Tara was my best friend from our days at Spelman College, my sorority sister, and undeniably the most feared corporate litigator in the city of Atlanta. She wore a tailored crimson power suit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, and her eyes blazing with protective fury. She spotted me on the hospital bed and rushed to my side, her fierce demeanor softening for just a fraction of a second as she took in the bandage on my head and the blood staining the collar of my silk dress. "Who do I need to destroy?" Tara demanded, her voice a low, lethal whisper. She did not ask how I was feeling. She knew me well enough to see that we were far past the point of seeking comfort. We were in war mode. I sat up, ignoring this protest of my injured muscles. I looked at my best friend and explained the situation with ice-cold clarity. I did not shed a single tear as I recounted the demand for my house, Winston swinging the heavy brass centerpiece at my skull, and Vivian worrying more about Chloe's dress than my life. I handed her my phone, showing her Julian's callous text message demanding I lie to the hospital staff. Then I opened my banking app and showed her the drained line of credit. Julian stole $150,000 from my company to pay for Chloe's reception, I stated flatly, my voice echoing in the quiet room. He did it while I was unconscious. Tara stared at the screen, her jaw tightening until a muscle leaped in her cheek. She pulled a sleek tablet from her designer tote bag and immediately began typing, her legal mind already analyzing the angles. I leaned back against the harsh hospital pillows as a profound realization washed over me. My 5-year marriage had never been a partnership built on love, respect, or shared dreams. It had been a calculated, systematic financial parasitism. Julian had targeted me because I was a self-made woman with liquid assets and a growing real estate portfolio. He played the supportive husband while secretly viewing me as an endless ATM for his family's high society aspirations. They despised my working-class background, mocking my lack of generational wealth behind closed doors, yet they eagerly leached off my success to maintain their fraudulent lifestyle. I spent half a decade trying to prove I was worthy of their acceptance, bending over backward to fit into their elitist world. I paid for their dinners, funded their vacations, and smiled through their microaggressions. But I was never family to them. I was simply a host organism, and now that they thought they had extracted my ultimate value, they were ready to discard me. I looked at Tara, who was already pulling up property records and banking regulations on her tablet. The girl who desperately wanted Julian's love had died on the floor of the hotel. The woman sitting in the hospital bed was a survivor, a CEO, and a very angry property developer who was about to show the elite circles of Atlanta exactly what happens when you underestimate a self-made woman. "We have so much work to do," I told Tara, my voice steady and resolute. "We are going to take back everything they stole, and we are going to burn their fake empire to the absolute ground." An orderly walked into the room to take me for a CT scan. Tara stepped aside, her fingers flying across her tablet screen. She did not look up as he helped me into the wheelchair, simply stating she would have the financial blueprints mapped out by the time I returned. The radiology department was freezing. I lay perfectly still on the hard plastic bed as it slid into the massive white ring of the CT scanner. Every metallic clank of the machine echoed the sound of that heavy brass centerpiece striking my skull. Winston had swung it with the intention to destroy me. Julian had watched me bleed. Vivian had worried about a dress. They were monsters hiding behind designer labels. The physical pain in my head was excruciating, but the emotional clarity was empowering. I was no longer a victim. I was a weapon being forged in the fires of their betrayal. The technician pulled me out of the machine, confirming the scan was complete. The journey back to the emergency room felt different. I was sitting in a wheelchair wearing a flimsy hospital gown, yet I felt more powerful than I ever had in my entire life. When the orderly wheeled me back into my room, Tara was pacing the small space. Her eyes darted across spreadsheets, financial disclosures, and encrypted banking records on her tablet. Before becoming a corporate litigator, Tara worked as a forensic accountant for the federal government. She knew exactly how to track hidden assets, offshore accounts, and fraudulent shell companies. Nobody could hide money from Tara. She looked up as the orderly left the room and closed the door behind him. The expression on her face was a mixture of absolute disgust and predatory excitement. I pulled myself back onto the hospital bed, adjusting the thin blanket over my legs. "Tell me everything," I demanded. Tara spun her tablet around. It was covered in red numbers and flagged transactions. She pointed at a document bearing Julian's name. "Your husband is a complete fraud," Tara stated, her voice sharp and clinical. "That chief financial officer title he brags about is an empty vanity metric. The boutique investment firm he claims to run is essentially a ghost ship." I stared at the screen, my heart beating a heavy rhythm against my ribs. "But he brings home a massive paycheck," I argued. "He pays his portion of our bills." I have seen the direct deposits with my own eyes. Tara shook her head. He is not bringing home a salary, Nia. He is moving money around to maintain the illusion of solvency. I bypassed your shared domestic accounts and found a massive digital graveyard. She swiped to a new screen displaying a complex web of cryptocurrency exchanges. Julian has been engaging in high-risk, highly leveraged offshore crypto trading for 4 years. He was trying to strike it rich overnight to prove he was just as capable as his father. Instead, he completely destroyed himself. He is carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden debt. His leveraged positions were liquidated, and he has been borrowing from predatory lenders just to keep his head above water. The air in the hospital room suddenly felt thin. I absorbed the reality of her words. His leased luxury cars and expensive custom-tailored suits were entirely funded by toxic debt. He was financially drowning, putting on a performance of extreme wealth while secretly crumbling under the weight of his own decisions. That explains the $150,000 he stole from my business account today, I said, my voice steady. He did not just need to pay off Chloe's wedding vendors. He was facing default on his personal loans and needed a massive influx of cash to prevent his entire house of cards from collapsing. Tara nodded, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. Exactly. But Julian is just a symptom of a much larger disease. I decided to pull the thread and see where it led. If the son is running a financial circus, I wanted to know exactly what the father was hiding. Tara brought up a massive dossier on Winston's legendary financial firm. Winston was a titan in Atlanta, managing the wealth of the city's most elite residents. His reputation was supposedly untouchable. I cross-referenced his firm's public filings with private audit reports circulating among my contacts in the banking sector. Winston is not a financial genius, Nia. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. A cold chill swept over my skin. A Ponzi scheme. Are you completely sure? Tara smiled, a grim, terrifying expression. I am absolutely positive. He has been using the funds from new investors to pay the returns of older investors, creating a completely fabricated track record of phenomenal growth. He successfully targeted his own Morehouse College alumni investment group, weaponizing their implicit trust to steal their life savings. She pointed to a glaring set of highlighted numbers. Winston has actively embezzled over $2 million from the alumni fund alone. He has been siphoning this cash to fund Vivian's country club lifestyle, lavish vacations, designer wardrobes, and most importantly, Chloe's upcoming marriage into generational wealth. Their obsession with high society and absolute dominance was entirely funded by stolen money. They were criminals masquerading as aristocracy. Desmond's family comes from genuine old money. I said, my mind connecting the dots rapidly. They are meticulous about their associations. If they discovered Winston was a fraud, the engagement would have been terminated immediately. Exactly, Tara confirmed. Desmond's family requested a thorough background check and proof of assets before agreeing to the marriage. Winston needed to show them massive unencumbered wealth to secure the union. He needed a legitimate asset to prove his family was operating on their level. But why my house? I asked, the final piece of the mystery hovering just out of reach. Why did they specifically demand the deed to my Buckhead property today? Why not just use one of Winston's properties? Tara took a deep breath and looked me squarely in the eyes. Because Winston does not actually own anything outright. Every single property in his name is leveraged to the absolute limit. He has borrowed against everything to keep the Ponzi scheme afloat. But your Buckhead smart home is a $900,000 physical asset completely unencumbered by debt. She tapped the tablet screen one final time, bringing up a calendar schedule. Furthermore, Winston's firm is facing a mandatory quarterly audit next week. He is $2 million short, and the alumni group is asking aggressive questions. He needed a massive influx of clean capital to quietly cover the embezzled funds before the auditors arrived. The terrifying truth finally washed over me in its entirety. It hit me harder than the brass centerpiece Winston had swung at my head. They did not want my house just to impress Desmond's wealthy mother. They wanted the quitclaim deed so Winston and Julian could instantly leverage my property. They planned to use my house as collateral to secure a massive emergency loan. They were going to take that cash to temporarily plug the $2 million hole in Winston's Ponzi scheme before the auditors discovered the theft. I was never just an unwelcome outsider to them. I was not just a convenient scapegoat for their social insecurities. I was their ultimate financial sacrificial lamb. They tolerated my presence solely because I was building wealth. They planned to steal my greatest professional achievement, drain its value to save themselves from federal prison, and leave me completely bankrupt. When I refused to sign the deed, I actively blocked their only avenue to escape criminal prosecution. I signed their financial death warrant. That was why Winston swung the brass at my head with lethal force. It was not just anger, it was sheer unadulterated panic. He was a desperate criminal backed into a corner. I sat perfectly still on the hospital bed. The throbbing pain in my skull faded into the background, replaced by a crystalline, overwhelming sense of purpose. Julian and Winston had built their entire lives on lies, theft, and exploitation. They thought they could crush me and take what was mine without facing any consequences. They assumed I would remain the quiet, obedient wife who blindly funded their delusions of grandeur. They were tragically mistaken. I looked at Tara. The evidence was irrefutable. The trap they had set for me was now fully exposed, but they had severely underestimated my resilience. They had also left their own flanks completely unguarded. Julian had foolishly left a digital trail of his crypto failures. Winston had arrogantly embezzled from highly connected men who would demand absolute vengeance once they knew the truth. Print every single document, I commanded, my voice devoid of any hesitation or fear. Secure the offshore records, the Ponzi scheme ledgers, the stolen alumni funds, and the fraudulent line of credit transfers. We are not just going to divorce Julian. We are going to orchestrate a public execution of their entire legacy. We will hand this evidence to the authorities, to the investors, and to Desmond's family. They wanted to use me as a sacrifice to save their fake empire, but I am going to be the absolute architect of their destruction. Tara smiled, a fierce, brilliant display of legal dominance. Consider it done, my friend. We have the ammunition. Now we just need the perfect stage to drop the bomb. Tara stood up, her sharp eyes scanning the small emergency room. She quickly packed her tablet into her leather tote bag. We have everything we need to bury them, she said, her voice a low and commanding whisper. I am going to head to my office right now to draft the emergency injunctions and secure the asset freeze on your business accounts. I will also contact the fraud department to reverse that stolen $150,000. But you need to stay here and play the victim a little longer. Let them think they still have the upper hand. I nodded, the fierce pain in my head serving as a sharp reminder of exactly what I was fighting for. Tara pulled my smartphone from my clutch and activated the voice memo application. She slipped the phone under the thin, scratchy hospital blanket, resting it directly against my palm. Keep your finger right here, Tara instructed, guiding my hand. If they show up, hit record immediately. Do not say a word. Let them talk. Let them hang themselves with their own arrogance. I will be back before you are discharged. With a final reassuring squeeze of my shoulder, Tara slipped out of the room, leaving me alone in the sterile silence. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed was the only sound. I focused on my breathing, willing my heart rate to slow down. I needed to be completely cold and entirely calculating. I needed to be a stone wall. Less than 10 minutes later, the heavy wooden door of my hospital room swung open. The sudden movement sent a draft of cold air across my face, but it was the smell that hit me first. The distinct, overwhelming odor of aged single malt scotch and expensive Cuban cigars flooded the sterile room, completely overpowering the smell of medical antiseptic. Julian and Winston stepped into the room. They looked absolutely immaculate in their bespoke tuxedos. There was not a single wrinkle in their clothes, not a hair out of place. They had clearly just come from Chloe's lavish wedding reception, taking a brief intermission from sipping champagne to deal with their inconvenient problem. Winston turned around and firmly clicked the door shut, locking it from the inside. He pulled the privacy blind down over the small glass window. They were sealing us in. Neither man looked at the heart monitor. Neither man glanced at the IV dripping fluids into my arm. Neither of them even acknowledged the thick white bandage secured to the side of my head, covering the wound Winston himself had inflicted just a few hours prior. To them, I was not a bleeding, injured human being. I was simply a business transaction that was currently holding up their master plan. Julian walked to the foot of my bed and crossed his arms. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. There was no worry in his eyes. There was no guilt for leaving his wife unconscious on a hotel floor. There was only deep annoyance that I was forcing him to miss his sister's party. Winston stepped up to the side of my bed. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a familiar piece of paper. It was the exact same quitclaim deed he had slammed onto the glass table at the St. Regis Hotel. The paper was slightly crumpled now, but the legal intent remained identical. He smoothed it out against his palm and placed it roughly onto the rolling hospital tray table, pushing it directly over my lap. Next, Winston reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen. He did not hand it to me. He dropped it. The heavy pen hit my thigh through the thin hospital blanket with a dull thud. "You have until midnight," Winston stated, his voice a low, threatening rumble that vibrated in the quiet room. "You are going to sign that document right now, and Julian is going to take it directly to the courthouse tomorrow morning. You have caused enough embarrassment for one day, Naya. It is time to end this ridiculous temper tantrum and do exactly what you are told." I stared up at him, keeping my face completely devoid of any emotion. Underneath the blanket, my thumb found the small, circular button on my phone screen. I pressed it. The recording app silently engaged, capturing every single breath, every single word. When I did not immediately reach for the pen, Winston stepped closer. His massive frame cast a dark shadow over my bed, deliberately attempting to intimidate me with his physical presence. "Let me explain exactly what happens if you refuse to sign that deed by midnight." Winston continued, a vicious sneer twisting his face. "Julian will file for divorce first thing Monday morning. And it will not be a quiet, amicable separation. It will be the most highly publicized, messy, and humiliating divorce this city has ever seen." I kept my eyes locked on his, my face a perfect blank mask. My silence seemed to infuriate him further, fueling his arrogant monologue. "You think you are so successful with your little boutique real estate firm?" Winston mocked, leaning over me. "You think your self-made wealth protects you? It does not. I have spent 30 years building connections in Atlanta. I play golf with the bank executives who approve your commercial loans. I sit on the charity boards with the city planners who approve your zoning permits. If you do not give Chloe that house today, I will personally ensure your firm is completely blacklisted by Monday afternoon." He was handing me the exact ammunition Tara needed. He was outlining his entire strategy of extortion with perfect damning clarity. "I will make one phone call," Winston threatened, his voice dripping with malice. "I will tell my associates that my son is divorcing you because he caught you committing adultery. I will tell them you are unstable, untrustworthy, and an absolute liability. No bank will ever finance your projects again. No vendor will work with you. Your entire professional reputation will be destroyed overnight. You will lose everything you have ever built, Nia. You will be completely bankrupt and completely alone." Julian uncrossed his arms and walked around to the other side of my bed. He flanked me, trapping me between the two of them. My own husband, the man who had vowed to protect me, looked at me as if I were a piece of garbage stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "You should listen to him," Nia, Julian said, his voice smooth and incredibly cold. "You really overplayed your hand today. You thought you could stand up to my father. You thought you could embarrass my family. You are absolutely delusional." Julian leaned in closer, invading my personal space. The smell of scotch on his breath was nauseating. He placed his hands on the metal railing of the hospital bed, leaning his face just inches from mine. "You are a nobody, Nia," Julian whispered, his words laced with pure venom. "You were a nobody before you met me, and you will be a nobody the second I take my last name back. The only reason anyone in this city respects you is because you are married to a prominent family. You think your little real estate developments make you special? They do not. You are nothing without us." He pointed to the heavy gold pen resting on my lap. "Sign the paper," Julian commanded. "Give Chloe the house. If you do this, we will let you walk away with a quiet divorce. We will not destroy your business. We will just let you fade back into the pathetic working-class obscurity you came from. But if you fight us, we will absolutely ruin your life." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I stared blankly at my husband, feeling a strange sense of awe at his monumental stupidity. He truly believed he possessed all the power in the room. He truly believed I was an easily manipulated victim who would cower at his threats. He had absolutely no idea that I already knew about his offshore crypto debt. He had no idea that I knew he stole $150,000 from my business account to pay for his sister's party. He had no idea that I knew his father was running a massive crumbling Ponzi scheme. They were standing in my hospital room, aggressively threatening to destroy my financial future, while their own financial empire was literal hours away from complete and total annihilation. Winston tapped his heavy gold ring against the metal tray table, impatient for my submission. "I am not going to ask you again, Nia. Pick up the pen. Sign the deed." I did not move a single muscle. I remained entirely silent. I did not argue with them. I did not attempt to defend my honor or my business. Arguing would only alert them to the fact that I was no longer playing their game. Silence was my greatest weapon. By refusing to speak, I offered them a blank canvas, and their massive egos enthusiastically painted a masterpiece of criminal extortion right over it. I just let them dig their graves deeper and deeper with every threatening word. "What is wrong with her?" Julian asked, looking at his father with a flash of confusion. "Did you hit her too hard? Is she brain damaged?" Winston scoffed, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. "She is just being stubborn. She thinks if she plays mute, we will eventually just walk away and leave her alone." Winston leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes dark and menacing. "You have until midnight, Nia. If we do not have that signed document in our hands by the time the reception ends, we are going to war. Enjoy your hospital stay." Winston turned on his heel and marched toward the door. Julian lingered for a second longer, staring at me with a mixture of disgust and irritation. He shook his head, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You really are pathetic," Julian whispered before turning to follow his father. Winston unlocked the heavy wooden door and pulled it open. The sounds of the busy emergency room flooded back into the quiet space. They walked out together, laughing about something Winston said, leaving the door wide open behind them. They strutted down the hallway, heading back to their expensive cars to return to their lavish party, completely confident that they had terrified me into total submission. I waited until their footsteps completely faded down the corridor. I waited until I was absolutely certain they were gone. Slowly, carefully, I pulled my hand out from underneath the scratchy hospital blanket. My thumb hovered over the screen of my smartphone. The red recording timer was blinking steadily, indicating a 12-minute audio file. I pressed the stop button. A small, cold smile finally broke across my face. I hit save on the audio file and immediately uploaded it to a secure cloud server, sharing the encrypted link directly to Tara's email address. Winston and Julian thought they had just delivered a masterful, terrifying ultimatum. They thought they had backed me into a corner with no escape. They had no idea they had just handed me a pristine, high-definition audio recording of criminal blackmail, marital extortion, and premeditated corporate sabotage. They wanted to go to war at midnight. I leaned my head back against the pillows, closing my eyes as the adrenaline hummed through my veins. They were going to get exactly what they asked for, but they would never see the absolute devastation coming until it was far too late. I had barely secured the phone back underneath the thin hospital blanket when the heavy wooden door to my room clicked open once again. My muscles instantly locked into a rigid defense mechanism. I braced myself for Winston and Julian to return with a newly conjured threat, or perhaps a nurse finally arriving to check my vitals. Instead, the man who stepped into the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room left me entirely speechless. It was Desmond. He was still wearing his immaculate, custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, perfectly fitted to his tall, athletic frame. The crisp white shirt and black silk bow tie were flawless, projecting the exact image of generational wealth and old money power his family was famous for. but the expression on his face completely shattered the illusion of a blissful groom. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his ear. His dark eyes, usually calm and composed, were currently burning with a quiet, terrifying fury. He did not look like the clueless, arrogant snob my in-laws always made him out to be behind his back. He looked like a man ready to burn a city to the ground. Desmond reached behind him and shut the door, mirroring the exact action Winston had taken just 15 minutes prior. However, the energy Desmond brought into the room was entirely different. There was no desperate bluster, no pathetic attempt at physical intimidation. He possessed the quiet, lethal authority of a man who genuinely held all the cards and knew exactly how to play them. He walked over to the side of my bed and looked down at my bandaged head. He did not offer empty platitudes or fake sympathy. He just stared at the bloodstains on my silk dress with a look of absolute disgust. "Winston told me you tripped on your high heels and hit your head on a marble pillar." Desmond stated, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone that filled the quiet room. "He said you were so embarrassed by your clumsiness that you demanded to take a cab to the hospital alone. He told my mother not to worry about the Buckhead estate deed because you were just sorting out some minor clerical errors and would have it signed by midnight." I remained silent, watching him carefully, unsure of his angle. I did not know if he was here as an emissary for Winston to enforce the blackmail, or if he was acting on his own accord. I kept my face an unreadable mask, evaluating his every move. "He lied to me." Desmond continued, stepping closer to the bed. I knew he was lying the second he spoke, because right before the ceremony, when Winston clapped me on the shoulder to welcome me to the family, I saw his French cuff. It was stained with a fresh, bright smear of blood. A marble pillar does not bleed onto a man's sleeve. And you do not trip and fall with enough force to require an emergency room visit without someone calling an ambulance. So I bypassed my own wedding reception. I left my blushing bride dancing to a jazz band, tracked down the paramedics who responded to the St. Regis, and came directly here to find out what my future father-in-law actually did to you. I looked at the furious groom standing before me and realized I had severely misjudged him. Julian and Winston had always painted Desmond as a naive trust fund kid, an easy mark they could impress with fake assets and charm. They truly believed they were manipulating him. They thought they had him entirely fooled. They were monumentally wrong. Winston hit me with a solid brass centerpiece, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I refused to sign over my house to Chloe. He lost his temper, struck me from behind, and knocked me unconscious on the floor. Julian and Vivian left me bleeding in the suite because they did not want to ruin Chloe's expensive dress or keep your family waiting. Desmond did not gasp. He did not act shocked. He simply nodded slowly, as if my horrifying confession merely confirmed a mathematical equation he had already solved. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He did not pull out a pen or a quitclaim deed. Instead, he pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. He tossed it lightly onto my lap. It landed right where Winston had dropped his gold pen. "Open it," Desmond commanded quietly. I picked up the heavy envelope, peeled back the metal clasp, and pulled out a stack of high-definition 8x10 glossy photographs. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the top image. It was a crisp, perfectly lit surveillance photo taken from across a dimly lit restaurant. It showed Chloe, my pristine golden child sister-in-law, leaning across a candlelit table, passionately kissing the man who was most definitely not Desmond. I shuffled to the next photo. It was taken outside a luxury high-rise apartment building. Chloe was wrapping her arms around the exact same man, her hands tangled in his hair. The third photo was taken through a large window showing the two of them intimately entangled on a modern leather sofa. I recognized the man instantly. It was Marcus. He was Julian's college fraternity brother, his closest confidant, and most importantly, he was serving as the best man at the wedding today. He was currently standing at the Botanical Gardens reception, giving toasts and drinking champagne while actively sleeping with the bride. "My family does not merge assets or reputations without conducting absolute comprehensive due diligence," Desmond explained, pulling up a chair and sitting down beside my bed. "The old money circles in this city survive by eliminating liabilities before they can cause damage." The day Chloe and I got engaged, my father retained a team of top-tier private investigators. We put physical surveillance on Chloe, Julian, and Winston. We tapped their public records, monitored their movements, and tracked their associations. These photos are just a small sample of a 6-month affair. Chloe has been sleeping with the best man since the week after I gave her a 4-carat diamond ring. She was in his apartment yesterday afternoon. I stared at the glossy photos, feeling a dark, vindictive satisfaction swelling inside my chest. The pristine, untouchable image of the perfect bride was completely obliterated in my hands. Chloe was not a high society princess. She was a reckless, arrogant fraud who believed she was entirely above the rules. But the infidelity is merely the icing on the cake. Desmond continued, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. My family's wealth management team also conducted a forensic sweep of Winston's financial firm. We did not like the return margins he was reporting to his investors. They looked too consistent, too artificially insulated from real market volatility. We quietly pulled the threads utilizing our own private banking contacts. We flagged his shady accounting weeks ago. We know he is running a Ponzi scheme, Nia. We know he has embezzled millions from his Morehouse alumni group. We know Julian is drowning in catastrophic offshore crypto debt. Desmond pointed a finger at the door Julian and Winston had just walked through. I knew they were planning to use your Buckhead property as a fraudulent life raft. My mother intentionally demanded to see the deed this morning to force their hand. We wanted to see exactly how far Winston would go to keep up his pathetic charade. We wanted to see if he would actually try to steal from his own daughter-in-law to save himself. We never anticipated he would resort to physical violence, but it perfectly confirms everything my family already knew about their lack of character. I looked at Desmond, truly seeing the ruthless intellect operating behind his handsome aristocratic features. He was not a victim in this scenario either. He was a predator who had calmly allowed his prey to walk willingly into a trap. His family had orchestrated this entire pressure test, meticulously pulling the strings to expose Winston's financial rot and Chloe's moral bankruptcy. You knew everything, I whispered, feeling the sheer gravity of his revelation settling over the room. You knew they were bankrupt. You knew she was cheating. You knew they were targeting my property. Why did you even let it get this far? Why did you stand at the altar and actually marry her today, if you already held the evidence to destroy them? Desmond's eyes darkened, a flash of genuine, terrifying pride igniting in his gaze. We did not sign the legal marriage certificate, Nia. The ceremony today was completely performative, a stage play for 500 of Atlanta's most elite residents. My family's reputation was insulted the moment Winston thought he could use us to fund his criminal enterprise. Chloe insulted my personal dignity the moment she invited her lover to stand beside me as my best man. In our world, you do not just quietly cancel a wedding and walk away from that level of profound disrespect. You make a public, undeniable example out of the people who tried to play you. He gestured toward the bloody bandage on my head, his expression hardening into cold, calculated determination. I came here to see if you were a willing participant in their scheme or a victim of their desperation. Seeing what Winston did to you and hearing that Julian left you here alone gives me my answer. You are not one of them. You are just the collateral damage they thought they could sweep under the rug. I am not collateral damage. I corrected him, my voice gaining strength as the final pieces of my own plan snapped perfectly into place. Tara is already freezing my accounts. I have an audio recording of Winston and Julian explicitly blackmailing me, threatening to destroy my business if I do not sign over the house by midnight. I was already planning to burn their empire to the ground. A slow, predatory smile spread across Desmond's face. The anger in his eyes shifted into deep, respectful admiration. He realized in that exact moment that we were cut from the exact same cloth. We were two individuals who had been severely underestimated by a family of arrogant, incompetent fools. Winston thinks he holds all the power, Desmond said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He thinks he can return to the botanical gardens, drink my family's champagne, and secure his fake legacy by midnight. He has absolutely no idea that his daughter's fake husband and his son's abused wife are currently sitting in a hospital room holding the matches and the gasoline. I looked down at the photographs of Chloe and the best man resting on my lap. I thought about the heavy brass centerpiece crashing into my skull. I thought about Julian telling me I was a nobody without his last name. I thought about Vivian stepping over my bleeding body to protect a wedding dress. "Let us go to the reception," I said, looking back up at Desmond with absolute unwavering certainty. "Let us give them exactly the kind of high society spectacle they have been desperate for." Desmond held my gaze, his dark eyes sharpening with a lethal edge. He slowly reached out, taking the manila envelope from my lap, and tucked the damning photographs back inside. The tension in the small hospital room shifted from mutual revelation to calculated warfare. We were no longer simply in-laws united by marriage. We were co-commanders drafting the blueprint for an execution. "You understand exactly what this means," Desmond said, his voice dropping to a smooth, quiet timbre. "If we walk into that botanical garden tonight, there is no stepping back. My family will not settle for a quiet annulment or a discreet financial severing." Chloe thought she could trap me into funding a bankrupt criminal enterprise while parading her lover in front of my face. Winston thought he could manipulate my family name to legitimize his Ponzi scheme. They insulted my bloodline. They tried to make us fools. In my world, we do not just close the door on an insult of that magnitude. We tear the entire building down with them inside. "I want them destroyed," I replied, matching his cold intensity. "Julian stole from my company. Winston tried to crack my skull open to steal my property. They looked at me and saw nothing but a disposable asset. I want Julian stripped of every fake accolade he hides behind. I want Winston handcuffed in front of his elite country club friends. I want Vivian to watch her precious social standing evaporate into thin air." Desmond extended his hand. It was large, warm, and steady. "We have a shared enemy, Nia, and we have the exact same objective. We are going to walk into that reception, and we are going to dismantle the fraudulent empire they spent their entire pathetic lives building." I placed my hand in his, sealing the unholy alliance. His grip was firm, a physical promise of absolute ruin for the people who had crossed us. Desmond pulled his chair closer to the bed, lowering his voice as we mapped out the strategy. The Botanical Gardens reception was currently in full swing. 500 of Atlanta's wealthiest and most influential residents were drinking premium champagne, eating caviar, and waiting for the newlyweds to make their grand entrance for the first dance. It was the absolute pinnacle of Winston and Vivian's social climbing career. It was the perfect stage. "My parents are already at the venue," Desmond explained, checking a heavy silver watch on his wrist. "They are holding court at the head table, playing their parts flawlessly. They know I bypassed the reception to find you. My father has his private wealth managers and our corporate attorneys standing by in the VIP lounge. They have the complete forensic accounting reports detailing Winston's embezzlement and Julian's massive crypto debt. We also have high-definition copies of Chloe's surveillance photos, ready to be projected on the massive digital screens flanking the dance floor." I felt a sharp thrill of anticipation. "My audio recording of Winston's blackmail is currently uploading to my lawyer's secure server," I added. "Tara is at her office right now drafting the emergency injunctions to freeze Julian out of my business accounts completely. She is reversing the fraudulent transfers he initiated while I was unconscious. I can have her meet us at the gardens with the digital audio file ready to play." Desmond nodded, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. We hit them simultaneously. We let them bask in the glory of the reception. We let Winston schmooze with the investors he is actively robbing. We let Chloe smile for the cameras with the best man. We let them reach the absolute peak of their arrogance. And then, right before the first dance, we take the stage and drop the guillotine. It was a flawless, devastating plan. Desmond needed to publicly sever ties to protect his family's legacy and ensure no one in Atlanta would ever associate the two bloodlines. I needed to legally, socially, and financially annihilate the men who thought they could casually discard my life for a quick payout. We were going to trap them inside their own gilded cage. I pushed the scratchy hospital blanket off my legs and swung my feet over the side of the bed. The room spun for a fraction of a second, the concussion sending a wave of dizziness through my brain. but the pure adrenaline pumping through my veins kept me upright. I looked at the clear plastic IV tube taped to the back of my hand. It was dripping a steady stream of saline and painkillers into my bloodstream. "I do not have time to wait for a formal discharge," I stated flatly. I reached over, peeled back the clear medical tape, and ripped the IV needle out of my vein in one swift fluid motion. A small bead of blood welled up on my skin. Desmond did not flinch or offer to call a nurse. He simply handed me a clean gauze pad from the tray table. I pressed it against my hand, applying pressure until the bleeding stopped. I stood up, testing my balance on the cold linoleum floor. My legs were steady. The pain in the back of my head was a dull, persistent throb, but it was entirely manageable. I walked over to the small plastic patient belongings bag sitting on the chair in the corner of the room. I reached inside and pulled out the ruined silk dress I had been wearing when Winston attacked me. The collar was stiff and stained dark brown with my own dried blood. I carefully folded the ruined garment and placed it into a clear plastic evidence bag I found in a drawer. "This is not going in the trash," I said, sealing the bag tight. "This is Exhibit A for the police when we file felony assault charges tonight. I am going to make Winston look at this blood right before the handcuffs click around his wrists." Desmond watched me with quiet approval. "You cannot crash the wedding of the decade wearing a hospital gown," he noted, gesturing to the thin cotton fabric clinging to my frame. "I will not have to," I replied, hearing the distinct aggressive clicking of high heels marching down the hallway. The heavy wooden door swung open and Tara marched back into the room. She froze for a split second, her sharp eyes darting from me standing by the bed to Desmond standing in his tuxedo. Her litigator instincts immediately engaged, assessing the threat level of the unexpected billionaire groom in the room. "Desmond is on our side," I told Tara before she could demand answers. "He knows everything. He knows about the Ponzi scheme. He knows about Julian's debt. He even knows Chloe has been sleeping with the best man for 6 months. His family is preparing to drop a nuclear bomb on the reception, and we are going to join them." Tara's severe expression melted into a terrifying, triumphant smile. She looked at Desmond with profound respect. "Well," she said, her voice practically purring with excitement, "I always did appreciate a man who knows how to conduct proper due diligence. The asset freezes are filed. Julian is locked out of everything. The stolen funds are being flagged for federal wire fraud right now. I have the audio recording of Winston's blackmail isolated, enhanced, and ready to broadcast." Tara swung her massive designer tote bag onto the hospital bed and unzipped it. "I knew you were not going to stay in this sterile box while the best show in town was happening," Tara said, pulling out a sleek black garment bag. "I stopped by your penthouse on the way back from my office. I bypassed your husband's pathetic moving boxes and grabbed the only thing appropriate for a funeral." She unzipped the garment bag, revealing a breathtaking floor-length black gown. It was a masterpiece of structured silk featuring a high, elegant neckline and a daring slit up the thigh. It was severe, powerful, and utterly devoid of mercy. It was the exact dress of a widow arriving to bury her fake marriage. I grabbed the dress and stepped into the small adjacent bathroom. I stripped off the hospital gown and slid the cool black silk over my skin. I smoothed the fabric down, adjusting the fit. I looked at myself in the harsh bathroom mirror. My face was pale, and the thick white bandage on my head was a glaring testament to the violence I had survived. I did not try to hide it. I did not try to comb my hair over the gauze. I wanted every single guest at that reception to see exactly what the prominent Winston family had done to me. I applied a dark, sharp shade of crimson lipstick I found in my clutch. I lined my eyes, making them look piercing and cold. I slipped my feet into a pair of black stiletto heels Tara had thoughtfully packed at the bottom of the bag. I was no longer the eager, accommodating wife, trying to win the approval of high society snobs. I was the absolute reckoning they had blindly invited into their home. I pushed the bathroom door open and stepped back into the emergency room. Tara and Desmond turned to look at me. Desmond adjusted his cuffs, his dark eyes sweeping over the black gown and the stark white bandage. "You look like an executioner," Desmond said, his voice laced with genuine awe. I picked up my clutch and the plastic evidence bag containing my bloodied dress. That is exactly what I am, I replied. Tara grabbed her tablet and slung her tote bag over her shoulder. Desmond opened the hospital room door, gesturing for us to lead the way. We marched down the sterile hospital corridor in a tight, formidable formation. Nurses and orderlies stopped and stared as a billionaire groom in a tuxedo, a corporate litigator in a crimson power suit, and a woman in a black evening gown with a bandaged head strode past the front desk without looking back. We stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. Desmond's sleek, black-armored town car was idling at the curb, the driver standing at attention holding the rear door open. We climbed into the leather interior, the heavy doors sealing us inside like a vault. "Take us to the botanical gardens," Desmond instructed the driver, his voice cold as ice. The engine roared to life and the car pulled away from the hospital, speeding toward the glittering lights of the city skyline. I looked out the tinted window, watching the city blur past. Julian, Winston, Vivian, and Chloe were currently sipping vintage champagne, laughing with their elite friends, entirely convinced their fraudulent empire was secure. They thought the worst part of their day was over. They had no idea the nightmare had not even begun. We were going to crash the reception of the decade, and we were going to make sure the entire city of Atlanta watched them burn. The silence inside Desmond's chauffeured SUV was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the rapid, aggressive clicking of Tara's acrylic nails against her tablet screen. The leather seats felt like the command center of a stealth bomber. I watched the Atlanta skyline reflect off the tinted glass, my mind shifting from the shock of the hospital room into the cold, calculated realm of financial warfare. Desmond poured a glass of sparkling water from the console and handed it to me. I took a sip, letting the icy liquid ground me. "We have a 30-minute drive to the botanical gardens," Tara announced, not looking up from her glowing screen. "We need to secure the perimeter before we drop the bomb. Nia, I need your verbal authorization to activate the blind trust protocols." "I authorize full activation," I stated clearly, my voice resolute. "Lock the vault, Tara." Desmond looked over, raising a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "A blind trust. You put your assets in a blind trust." I turned to the billionaire groom and allowed myself a grim, knowing smile. Julian and Winston spent the entire day operating under the delusion that I was a vulnerable, naive woman they could easily manipulate. Winston swung a heavy brass centerpiece at my head because I refused to sign a quitclaim deed for my $900,000 Buckhead property. He thought forcing my signature would instantly hand him the equity he desperately needed to cover his massive Ponzi scheme deficit. I leaned back against the plush leather seat. But Winston is a dinosaur and Julian is an absolute fool. I built my real estate development firm entirely from scratch before I even met Julian. I saw how his family operated. I saw Vivian's obsession with designer labels and Winston's constant need to project supreme wealth. I loved Julian, but I'm also a businesswoman who protects her investments. 3 months before our wedding, Tara and I quietly transferred the deed to the Buckhead estate, along with controlling interest in my commercial development firm, into an impenetrable, irrevocable blind trust. Tara smirked, her fingers flying across the digital keyboard as she pulled up the heavy legal framework. "Julian's name is nowhere near those assets," she explained to Desmond. "He has absolutely no legal claim, no equity stake, and zero administrative authority. Even if Winston had successfully forced Nia to sign that quitclaim deed today, the document would have been legally useless. You cannot transfer an asset you do not technically own." Winston committed a violent felony for a piece of paper that holds the exact same legal weight as a cocktail napkin. Desmond let out a low, appreciative whistle. He shook his head, a dark amusement dancing in his eyes. They thought they were playing chess with a pawn, but they were actually dealing with the grandmaster. "Exactly," I said. "Julian's threat to ruin me in a messy divorce is completely toothless. My wealth is heavily fortified behind layers of corporate shielding. They cannot touch my business, and they cannot touch my home. But the fact that they resorted to violence and extortion just proves exactly what they are. Now it is time to cut off their oxygen supply completely." Tara navigated to my corporate banking portal on her tablet. "We have the structural assets secured," she reported. "Now we deal with the liquid capital. Julian used his emergency access to siphon $150,000 from your business line of credit. He wired the funds into your joint domestic checking account, and from there, he blasted the money out to the elite vendors managing tonight's reception. He thought he was being clever, I said, staring at the digital ledger displaying the massive, unauthorized transactions. He thought I would be too incapacitated by my head injury to check my accounts until Monday. He assumed he could use my hard-earned capital to pay for his sister's extravagant party, saving his own deeply indebted neck in the process. I pulled my own phone from my clutch and opened my Elite Banking Concierge application. I hit the direct dial button for the fraud department. An agent answered on the first ring. "This is Nia Wilson," I stated, my voice echoing with icy authority in the quiet cabin of the SUV. "I am calling to report a massive unauthorized security breach on my corporate line of credit. A sum of $150,000 was fraudulently wired out of my account exactly 2 hours ago without my physical consent." The agent's tone instantly shifted into high alert protocol. I hear the rapid typing on his end of the line. "I see the transactions, Mrs. Wilson. They were routed through your joint checking account. Shall I initiate a reversal?" "I want full fraud protocols activated immediately," I commanded. "I want the initial wire transfer flagged as a stolen asset. I want you to initiate immediate chargebacks on every single secondary payment made from that joint account this afternoon. Furthermore, I want every single joint account credit card and savings portfolio bearing Julian Wilson's name completely frozen. Lock him out of everything." "Consider it done," the agent replied efficiently. "We are issuing the chargebacks to the receiving merchant banks right now. Your joint accounts are effectively frozen pending a full federal fraud investigation." I ended the call and dropped the phone back into my clutch. Tara looked up from her screen, her eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. "The chargebacks are processing," Tara confirmed, watching the red alerts multiply across her financial dashboard. "The merchant banks are actively yanking that stolen money right back out of the vendors' accounts. Julian is now officially penniless. His credit cards will decline. His debit cards are frozen solid. He cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone fund a $500,000 high society wedding reception." Desmond adjusted his silk bow tie, leaning back against the leather seat. "You do realize what you just did, right?" Desmond asked, his voice low and thrumming with anticipation. "I just pulled the emergency brake on the wedding of the decade," I replied. As our SUV sped down Peachtree Street toward the Botanical Gardens, a quiet, absolute panic was beginning to brew behind the scenes of Chloe's flawless reception. I could picture the scene perfectly in my mind. In the opulent hidden staging tents erected behind the main glass conservatory, the city's most exclusive wedding planner was likely pacing the floor. She had spent the entire afternoon coordinating the arrival of exotic orchids, managing the lighting technicians, and ensuring the 5-tier cake was perfectly positioned. Her entire fee, along with the final massive payments for the vendors, had been scheduled to clear by early evening. Suddenly, her proprietary vendor management tablet would light up with a glaring red notification. The $50,000 final payment to the luxury catering company reversed. The notification would state the funds were flagged for suspected wire fraud. A moment later, another alert would chime. The $30,000 payment to the elite floral designer reversed. Fraud alert. Then, the $25,000 payment to the venue itself reversed. Fraud alert. I imagined the wedding planner's heart dropping into her stomach as she stared at the cascading wave of financial defaults. She would immediately try to run the secondary credit cards Winston and Julian had placed on file for incidentals. She would swipe Winston's platinum card. Declined. She would swipe Julian's black card. Declined. Every single financial lifeline attached to the Wilson family name was suddenly dead in the water. The domino effect would be instantaneous and catastrophic. The head chef of the luxury catering company, a notoriously temperamental culinary artist, would receive the notification from his own banking app. He would look out at the 500 wealthy guests expecting their Wagyu beef and butter-poached lobster, and he would realize he was not getting paid for any of it. He would immediately instruct his entire waitstaff to halt the dinner service. The manager of the 12-piece jazz band, currently providing the elegant atmospheric music for the cocktail hour, would get a frantic call from his booking agent. The wire transfer for their performance fee had just been yanked back by the Federal Fraud Department. The band leader would signal his musicians to stop playing demanding answers before they played another single note. The event staff, the bartenders, the lighting crew, and the security team would quickly catch wind of the panic spreading through the staging tents. Whispers of unpaid bills, frozen credit cards, and federal wire fraud would spread like wildfire among the workers serving the champagne. The pristine, highly controlled environment of Vivian's dream wedding would rapidly descend into absolute backstage chaos. Winston and Julian were currently standing in the main conservatory, shaking hands with elite politicians, schmoozing with prominent judges, and projecting an aura of untouchable generational wealth. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their entire financial facade was actively crumbling just a few feet away behind the heavy velvet curtains. They thought they had secured their legacy. They thought they had successfully terrorized me into funding their criminal charade. They had no idea that the caterers were about to walk out. The band was about to pack up their instruments, and the event planner was actively searching the crowd to demand immediate payment. Our black SUV turned onto the main avenue leading to the botanical gardens. The venue was illuminated by thousands of fairy lights, casting a magical, romantic glow over the manicured grounds. Valet attendants were rushing to park a line of luxury vehicles. It looked like a perfect, beautiful fairy tale. Desmond looked out the window at the glittering venue, his face hardening into a mask of pure aristocratic fury. "It is time," he said, his voice deadly quiet. I stepped out of the vehicle, my black silk gown flowing around my legs, the dark fabric a stark contrast to the bright lights of the party. The bandage on my head throbbed, but I welcomed the pain. It fueled the fire burning brightly in my chest. Tara flanked me on my left, gripping her tablet like a weapon. Desmond walked on my right, projecting the silent, terrifying authority of a man ready to destroy the people who had insulted his bloodline. We walked past the confused valet attendants and headed straight for the massive glass double doors of the conservatory. The unholy alliance had arrived, and we were about to turn their high society dream into a spectacular, unforgettable nightmare. We paused just outside the massive glass double doors. The muffled sound of the jazz band could be heard from inside, though the tempo seemed erratic, likely the result of the financial panic beginning to ripple through the event staff behind the velvet curtains. Before Desmond could reach out to pull the polished brass door handle, Tara placed a restraining hand on his tuxedo sleeve. "We have one final payload to arm before we make our grand entrance," Tara stated, her voice slicing through the humid night air with absolute authority. She tapped the screen of her tablet, bringing up a secure encrypted folder. "While you two were establishing your alliance in the emergency room, I was executing a covert operation of my own. I knew we needed more than just a financial blockade. We needed a cage they could not buy their way out of." Tara explained that after she left my hospital bedside the first time to retrieve my dress from my penthouse, she made a highly calculated detour to the St. Regis Hotel. She knew my audio recording of the blackmail was damning, but a jury would want to see the physical violence to secure an aggravated assault or attempted murder charge without the possibility of bail. Getting internal hotel surveillance footage without a police warrant is traditionally impossible, but Tara did not just walk up to the front desk and ask politely. She bypassed the lobby entirely and took the private elevator straight to the executive management offices. The general manager of the St. Regis was a woman named Elena. 5 years ago, Elena was a struggling single mother who had just been promoted to a junior management position, but she could not find safe, affordable housing in a decent school district for her twin daughters. My real estate development firm had just finished a boutique townhouse project in an up-and-coming neighborhood. When I heard Elena's story through a mutual banking contact, I sold her first home precisely at cost. I cut out every single developer profit margin because I recognized her relentless drive and wanted to give her a solid foundation to build her life upon. Elena had never forgotten that gesture. When Tara walked into her corner office, explained that I was currently sitting in a hospital emergency room with a severe head injury, and named Winston as the primary attacker, Elena did not hesitate. Loyalty in the elite business world is exceedingly rare, but when you cultivate it properly with genuine kindness, it pays dividends that money simply cannot buy. Elena completely bypassed the hotel's corporate legal protocols and threw the employee handbook out the window. She locked the heavy mahogany door to her office, logged directly into the master security mainframe, using her executive override credentials, and granted Tara unrestricted access to the VIP bridal suite's internal surveillance cameras and the high-definition hallway monitors. Tara turned her tablet toward me and Desmond. The screen illuminated our faces in the dark shadows of the botanical gardens. "Watch this," Tara commanded softly. She hit play on the video file. The footage was crystal clear, shot in flawless 4K resolution from a discreet security camera positioned high in the corner of the lavish bridal suite. It had captured pristine audio as well. We watched the scene unfold with horrifying, undeniable clarity. I saw my digital self standing near the ornate vanity, my posture rigid, as I refused to sign the quitclaim deed. I heard Julian screaming at me, his face contorted with pathetic, impotent rage. Then the camera caught Winston. He moved with terrifying speed for a man his age, driven by the sheer desperation of a collapsing fraudster. He grabbed the heavy, solid brass centerpiece off the marble console table. He swung it like a baseball bat, putting the full weight of his body behind the strike. The heavy brass struck the back of my head with a sickening audible crack that echoed sharply from the tablet's speakers. Desmond clenched his jaw so hard the muscles jumped in his cheek, his dark eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. I watched my own body crumple to the floor like a discarded rag doll, completely limp before I even hit the ground. The camera angle provided a devastating bird's-eye view of the dark crimson blood instantly pooling on the pristine white marble floor, spreading outward and permanently staining the hem of my silk dress. But the most damning part of the footage was what happened next. Vivian walked into the frame. She did not scream. She did not drop her purse. She did not rush to my side to check for a pulse or call for medical assistance. She looked down at my bleeding unconscious body with an expression of mild inconvenienced irritation. She carefully gathered the voluminous skirt of Chloe's ridiculously expensive wedding gown, holding the pristine white fabric high above her ankles. Then she literally stepped directly over my bleeding head to avoid ruining the dress. Winston casually wiped the bloody brass centerpiece with a cocktail napkin, adjusted his silk tie, and followed his wife out the door as if he had just swatted a nuisance fly. Julian was the last to leave. He stood over my body for a fraction of a second, a look of cowardly panic on his face, before stepping over me just as carelessly. He tossed his burner phone into his pocket and abandoned me to bleed to death on the floor of a luxury hotel so they would not be late for a cocktail hour. Desmond let out a breath that sounded like a low, predatory growl. His eyes were completely black with cold, unadulterated rage. "They left you to die," he stated, the realization cementing his absolute commitment to their total destruction. "They treated you like roadkill to protect a party." I stared at the frozen frame of Vivian stepping over me. I felt no sorrow, no lingering attachment to the man I had called my husband, only an icy, profound detachment from the people who had viewed my life as expendable collateral damage. "Send it," I told Tara, my voice perfectly level. "Send everything." Tara's fingers moved with lethal precision across the screen. "I already have the secure email drafted to Captain Miller at the Atlanta Police Department. He owes me a massive favor from a previous corporate litigation case, and he detests high society criminals. But I am not stopping at the local level. I am simultaneously copying Special Agent Harris at the FBI's white-collar crime division." Desmond raised an approving eyebrow. "The FBI?" Tara smiled, a sharp, terrifying expression that promised absolute ruin. "Special Agent Harris has been quietly building a federal case against Winston's financial firm for the past 8 months. They suspected a massive Ponzi scheme was operating behind the closed doors of his elite country club circles, but they lacked the definitive internal proof to execute a raid. Your family's forensic accounting report, combined with Nia's crystal-clear audio recording of Winston, explicitly admitting to extortion to cover his liquidity crisis, is the exact smoking gun they have been desperate for. Adding 4K video footage of him committing aggravated assault against a prominent business owner turns this from a quiet, drawn-out white-collar investigation into a high-profile multi-agency federal takedown. They are not going to send a polite summons. They are going to kick the doors in. I watched the progress bar on Tara's tablet screen fill with bright green as the massive encrypted files transferred through cyberspace. The crystal clear audio of the blackmail the bank records showing Julian's brazen theft and the brutal high definition video of the assault all vanished into the secure inboxes of federal and local law enforcement. The dispatch is confirmed, Tara announced, locking her tablet and sliding it back into her designer tote bag. Captain Miller just replied. He is fast-tracking the arrest warrants right now. He has units deploying to the St. Regis to secure the physical crime scene, and he is dispatching a tactical strike team directly here to the Botanical Gardens. They are coming for Winston and Julian. And they are bringing the federal agents with them to secure the digital financial assets on site. We were no longer just crashing a wedding reception to cause a scene. We were the designated vanguard of a federal raid. The timing was perfectly orchestrated. By the time Winston and Julian realized their credit cards were frozen and their caterers were walking out, the police sirens would already be wailing down the street. The trap was locked, and the key had been thrown away. I looked up at Desmond. He extended his arm, offering it to me with the formal, impeccable grace of a true Southern gentleman. I looped my arm through his, feeling the solid, reassuring strength of his presence. He was the perfect shield and the perfect weapon. "Shall we go greet our guests?" Desmond asked, his voice smooth, refined, and dangerously calm. "Let us go give the bride a wedding gift she will never forget," I replied, lifting my chin. With Tara walking a single step behind us like a general observing her frontline troops, Desmond reached out and pushed open the heavy glass double doors of the conservatory. The cool, quiet night air was instantly replaced by the overwhelming fragrant scent of thousands of blooming orchids and the loud, panicked murmurs of a high society event actively descending into chaos. The grand entrance into the sheer scale of the Botanical Gardens' main conservatory was designed to intimidate. Towering walls of curved glass arched 80 feet into the air, enclosing a sprawling multi-level event space completely transformed for the evening. Tens of thousands of rare white orchids hung suspended from the steel girders, creating a living canopy of flowers that cascaded down toward the floor like frozen rain. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in and hoisted into the botanical canopy, casting a warm golden glow over the meticulously manicured indoor jungle. Below, a massive custom dance floor, made of polished black marble, covered the central courtyard, surrounded by dozens of round tables draped in heavy ivory silk. It was a breathtaking display of wealth designed specifically to cement the Wilson family's status among the absolute highest echelon of Atlanta society. Every single person in the room represented power. I recognized a state senator laughing near the indoor waterfall. I saw the chief executive of a major regional bank swirling a glass of scotch. There were prominent judges and legendary real estate tycoons and old money matriarchs draped in diamonds. This was the exact crowd Winston and Julian needed to legitimize their failing empire. But beneath the glittering surface of the reception, the foundation was actively cracking. As Desmond, Tara, and I stood at the top of the grand marble staircase overlooking the event, I could see the panic beginning to bleed through the cracks. The upbeat, lively tempo of the jazz band stationed on the raised stage felt frantic rather than celebratory. Waiters carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres were huddled together near the kitchen entrances, whispering furiously to one another. I watched the elite wedding planner dart past a row of tropical ferns, her face flushed red as she pressed a walkie-talkie headset desperately to her ear. The financial freeze Tara and I had initiated was already taking effect. The vendors knew the money was gone, and the structural integrity of the evening was in freefall. Despite the backstage chaos, the guests remained entirely oblivious. The dull roar of 500 wealthy individuals networking and socializing filled the massive conservatory. Desmond offered me his arm once more. I slipped my hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the fine wool of his tuxedo jacket. Tara took her position on my other side, her crimson suit a bold slash of color against the sea of pastel gowns and dark formal wear. Together we began our descent down the grand staircase. We moved slowly, deliberately, commanding attention with every step we took. The visual impact we created was undeniable. A billionaire groom walking arm in arm with a woman in a severe black evening gown, her head visibly wrapped in thick white medical gauze, flanked by a notorious corporate litigator. Heads began to turn. Conversations trailed off into confused silence as guests noticed our descent. The wealthy elite of Atlanta thrive on scandal, and we were serving them a masterpiece. Vivian was the very first person from the inner circle to spot us. She was standing near the base of the staircase holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne and laughing politely at a joke told by a federal judge's wife. She turned her head, her gaze sweeping upward, and froze. All the color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face. Her jaw went slack. The champagne flute trembled violently in her hand, spilling a few drops of pale liquid onto her expensive silk wrap. She stared at the bloody white bandage wrapped securely around my head, and pure, unadulterated terror flashed in her eyes. She knew exactly what that bandage represented, and she knew I had not stayed hidden in the hotel suite like a good, obedient victim. Julian noticed his mother's sudden paralysis. He followed her line of sight, his eyes tracking up the marble steps until they locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine fear ripple across his handsome, arrogant features. But Julian was incapable of maintaining anything other than supreme entitlement. The fear was quickly swallowed by a surge of furious indignation. He muttered a hasty apology to the group of wealthy investors he had been actively charming, set his drink down on a passing tray, and power-walked toward the bottom of the stairs to intercept us. He reached the landing just as Desmond, Tara, and I stepped off the final marble stair. Julian moved aggressively, completely ignoring Desmond and Tara. He reached out and wrapped his fingers tightly around my upper arm, his grip punishing and possessive. He leaned in close, his cologne overpowering the scent of the orchids. "What the hell are you doing here?" He hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper intended only for my ears. "You are out of your mind. You need to turn around and walk right back out those doors before you embarrass yourself and completely ruin my sister's reception. Have you lost all sense of dignity?" I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, then I looked up into his eyes. I did not flinch. I did not shrink away. I let a slow, terrifyingly cold smile spread across my face. I yanked my arm out of his grasp with enough violent force that he stumbled backward a half step, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "I am not the one who should be worried about embarrassment tonight, Julian," I replied, my voice projecting just loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear the icy disdain in my tone. Before Julian could recover and launch another verbal assault, Desmond stepped forward. He did not say a word. He simply shifted his tall, athletic frame to stand directly between me and Julian. Desmond stared down at my husband with a look of absolute soul-crushing contempt. Julian froze, suddenly realizing that the billionaire groom, the man his family had spent 6 months plotting to exploit, was standing shoulder to shoulder with his abused wife. Confusion and rising panic warred on Julian's face as his mind struggled to process the impossible alliance standing before him. I did not give him time to figure it out. I glided past Julian, letting the silk train of my black gown brush against his polished shoes. Tara followed closely behind me, offering Julian a predatory, mocking smile that made him swallow hard. Desmond remained at the base of the stairs for a moment longer, holding Julian's panicked gaze before turning and effortlessly merging into the crowd to find his own parents in the VIP lounge. I walked with absolute purpose through the sea of ivory tables. The guests parted for me instinctively, their eyes tracking my every movement. Whispers erupted in my wake like dry leaves catching fire. Everyone was staring at the stark white bandage contrasting with my severe black gown. They were wondering who I was, why I was dressed for a funeral, and why the groom had escorted me into the room instead of his bride. I navigated the maze of tables until I reached the massive elevated platform at the far end of the conservatory. This was the main family table, a long, sweeping arrangement covered in white roses, crystal candelabras, and silver chargers. It was designed to look like royalty holding court. And sitting directly in the center of it all, radiating smug, unearned authority, was Winston. He was deeply engaged in conversation with a prominent state senator, gesturing expansively with his hands and laughing loudly. He looked like a man who believed he owned the entire city. He had no idea his credit cards were currently bouncing at the vendor stands just 50 feet away. I walked straight up to the elevated platform. I did not ask for permission. I pulled out the heavy velvet upholstered chair directly to Winston's right, the seat of honor traditionally reserved for the father of the groom, and I sat down. Winston felt the movement beside him. He turned his head, a polite politician's smile already forming on his lips, expecting to greet another wealthy sycophant. The smile died instantly. His eyes locked onto the thick gauze wrapped around my head. His gaze dropped to my black gown and then back up to my face. The muscles in his neck tightened into rigid cords. The senator, sensing the sudden, suffocating tension, awkwardly excused himself and hurried away to find the bar. Winston leaned closer to me, his voice a low, gravelly threat masked behind a stiff, public smile. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here looking like that," he muttered, his eyes scanning the room to ensure no one was close enough to hear him. "But your timing is impeccable. I assume your presence here, sitting quietly at my table, means you finally found some common sense. I assume you brought the signed quitclaim deed. Hand it over right now, and I will be generous enough to have security escort you out the back door before you cause a scene." He actually believed he had won. He looked at my silence and interpreted it as total submission. He thought the heavy brass centerpiece had successfully beaten the defiance out of me. He thought the blackmail had worked. He thought I was sitting here in a black dress to mourn my own defeat. I did not answer him. I simply turned my head and looked out over the massive, polished black marble dance floor. The jazz band had struck up a lively, upbeat swing tune, completely contrasting with the heavy, lethal tension radiating from our table. Out on the floor under the canopy of thousands of white orchids, Chloe was dancing. She was the absolute picture of a perfect, blissful bride. Her custom designer gown sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. She threw her head back and laughed, spinning gracefully in the arms of a wealthy groomsman. Just a few feet away, Marcus, the best man and her secret lover, was standing at the edge of the dance floor watching her with a possessive, intimate smile while holding a glass of scotch. It was a brilliant, flawless illusion of high society perfection. Chloe was playing her part beautifully, completely unaware of the impending doom rushing toward her. She had no idea Desmond had already seen the surveillance photos of her entangled with Marcus. She had no idea the marriage certificate remained unsigned. She was dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, thoroughly convinced she was the queen of the ocean. I turned my attention back to Winston. He was still glaring at me, waiting for me to reach into my clutch and hand over the document that would save his life. The sheer arrogance of his expectation was almost beautiful. I picked up a crystal goblet of ice water from the table and took a slow, elegant sip. I placed the glass back down onto the pristine white linen tablecloth, ensuring the movement was perfectly calm and deliberate. I looked Winston dead in the eye, my gaze entirely devoid of fear, hesitation, or mercy. "I do not have your paperwork, Winston," I stated clearly, my voice carrying the quiet, undeniable weight of an absolute promise. "But I highly suggest you enjoy this music while it lasts, because the band is about to stop playing and you are going to need both of your hands empty when they put the cuffs on you." Winston's eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. For a fraction of a second, the polished, aristocratic mask slipped entirely, revealing the violent, desperate animal trapped underneath. He opened his mouth to issue another threat, perhaps to lean over the table and drag me out of my chair by my hair, but a sharp, echoing feedback squeal from the main stage speakers cut him off. The jazz band abruptly ceased playing their lively tune. The master of ceremonies, a minor local television celebrity hired for an exorbitant fee, stepped up to the crystal podium and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the booming voice echoed across the sprawling glass conservatory. "If I could please direct your attention to the main stage. It is time for the evening's toasts." Winston's posture snapped back into rigid perfection. He smoothed the lapels of his custom tuxedo, forced a brilliant, entirely fake smile onto his face, and shot me one final warning glare. He thought my cryptic words were just the empty bravado of a defeated woman. He truly believed my silence was a reluctant surrender. He turned on his heel and strode purposefully toward the stage. soaking in the polite, expectant applause from the crowd of 500 elite guests. He took the microphone, standing beneath the warm golden glow of the spotlight. He looked out over the sea of wealthy politicians, corporate executives, and high society matriarchs playing the role of the benevolent patriarch flawlessly. Family. Winston began his voice, a rich, resonant baritone that filled the massive room. Everything we do in this life, everything we build, everything we sacrifice is for family. I watched him from my seat at the head table, my face an unreadable mask. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the man was staggering. He had literally battered his daughter-in-law with a brass weapon and left her bleeding on a hotel floor just hours prior to secure his own financial survival. Yet he stood there under the bright lights, preaching to the elite about loyalty and honor. When I look out at this magnificent gathering tonight, Winston continued, gesturing broadly to the room with his free hand, I see the very definition of Black excellence. We are a community that lifts each other up. We build generational wealth, we protect our own, and we honor the deep, unbreakable sanctity of family. Today we are not just celebrating a wedding. We are celebrating the merging of two powerful dynasties built on a foundation of absolute trust and integrity. He turned his gaze toward Chloe. She was standing near the edge of the black marble dance floor, holding a glass of champagne and gazing up at her father with practiced photogenic adoration. To my beautiful daughter Chloe, Winston proclaimed, placing a hand over his heart. You have always been the absolute light of my life. You are my perfect angel. You deserve every single ounce of happiness, wealth, and success this world has to offer. And to Desmond, Winston shifted his attention to the billionaire groom standing quietly near the edge of the stage. Welcome to our family, son. I could not have handpicked a better, more honorable man to protect my daughter and carry our legacy forward into the future. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Glasses of premium vintage champagne were raised high in the air. Winston beamed, waving modestly to the crowd, soaking in the validation and the praise. He was at the absolute zenith of his social climbing career, basking in the illusion of his own manufactured greatness. Desmond was introduced next. He walked slowly up the short flight of stairs to the stage. As they crossed paths, Winston clapped Desmond firmly on the shoulder, a physical display of dominance and false affection. Desmond did not flinch. He did not smile. He simply took the microphone from Winston's hand, his expression entirely unreadable. Desmond stood alone at the crystal podium. He possessed a commanding gravitational pull that instantly quieted the massive room. The clinking of glasses ceased. The low murmur of wealthy conversations vanished. 500 pairs of eyes locked onto the impossibly wealthy heir, waiting for the loving words of a devoted husband. Thank you, Winston, Desmond said, his voice smooth, chillingly calm, and perfectly amplified across the venue. And thank you to all of the distinguished guests who traveled far and wide to be here tonight to witness this union. I especially want to thank my parents who are sitting right over there at the front table for showing me exactly what a real, honorable, and respectful marriage looks like. He paused, letting the silence stretch over the room like a taut, dangerous wire. The air in the conservatory suddenly felt heavier, the atmospheric temperature dropping several degrees. Desmond did not look like a man in love. He looked like a general surveying a battlefield. My family built its legacy on a very specific set of principles, Desmond announced, his tone dropping into a lethal monotone deadpan. We do not deal in illusions. We do not tolerate disrespect. We value transparency and truth above absolutely all else. He gripped the microphone stand, his dark eyes sweeping over the quiet crowd before locking directly onto Chloe. She blinked, her smile faltering slightly as the strange, heavy tone of his speech finally registered. So Desmond said, his voice echoing like a judge handing down a final sentence, "Let us be completely transparent." Desmond did not say another word. He simply raised his left hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the audiovisual team stationed in the elevated booth at the back of the room. The sparkling crystal chandeliers instantly went dark. The romantic ambient uplighting illuminating the thousands of hanging orchids shut off simultaneously. The entire sprawling conservatory was plunged into sudden, dramatic shadow. Before the crowd could even begin to murmur in confusion, the massive state-of-the-art LED screens flanking the main dance floor dropped down from the high ceiling with a heavy mechanical whir. The guests shifted in their seats, raising their phones, anticipating a highly produced romantic photo montage of the bride and groom's courtship. Instead, the giant digital screens flickered to life, projecting a brutally crisp, high-definition security feed. The timestamp in the bottom right corner glowed in stark white numbers, indicating the footage had been captured mere hours ago. The setting on the screen was unmistakable. It was the opulent, private VIP bridal suite at the St. Regis Hotel. The crowd leaned in, squinting in the darkness, utterly confused. Then the figures on the screen moved into sharp, undeniable focus. It was Chloe. She was wearing her embroidered silk bridal robe, her hair and makeup perfectly styled for her walk down the aisle. But she was not alone. She was standing in the center of the luxurious suite, her hands desperately gripping the lapels of a man's tuxedo jacket. The man turned his head, his face captured in flawless 4K resolution on the 20-foot screens for the entire city to see. It was Marcus, the best man. The footage showed Chloe aggressively pulling Marcus toward her. It showed them colliding in a heavy, passionate embrace. It showed her hands tangling in his hair, their mouths locked together in a frantic, undeniable display of extreme intimacy. It was not a brief lapse in judgment. It was the desperate, hungry behavior of two people who had been carrying on a hidden, illicit affair for months, caught on camera literally hours before the wedding ceremony was scheduled to begin. For 3 agonizing seconds, the sprawling conservatory was dead silent. The sheer, unadulterated shock paralyzed 500 of Atlanta's most powerful residents. Then the room completely erupted. A deafening collective gasp tore through the crowd, a sound like all the oxygen being violently sucked out of the room at once. The horrified whispers began instantly escalating into a chaotic, roaring crescendo of disbelief and scandalized outrage. Politicians turned away in disgust. Corporate executives pointed at the screen. High society socialites covered their mouths, their eyes wide with absolute horror. Chloe, standing near the center of the dance floor, let out a piercing, hysterical scream. The sound tore from her throat as she stared up at her own digital face magnified 20 feet high, her pristine image actively burning to ash in front of her elite friends. Her fingers went limp. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her grasp, hitting the polished black marble floor and shattering into 100 glittering, jagged pieces. Marcus, the best man, went completely pale. The blood drained from his face as he looked at the massive screens and realized his life, his reputation, and his career in Atlanta were instantaneously vaporized. Blind animal panic seized him. He dropped his drink, spun on his heel, and bolted toward the nearest glass exit door, desperate to escape the blinding humiliation. He did not make it 5 steps. Out of the shadows of the towering floral arrangements, Desmond's private security detail materialized. 6 massive, broad-shouldered men in identical tailored suits stepped smoothly into the aisles with military precision. 2 of them intercepted Marcus, grabbing him by the shoulders and shoving him roughly backward, physically blocking his escape path. The other 4 positioned themselves directly in front of the main exit doors, standing with their arms crossed, locking the entire party inside the venue. No one was leaving. At the VIP tables, Vivian realized the magnitude of the disaster unfolding around her. Her meticulously curated social empire, her standing at the country club, her entire reason for existing, was being actively incinerated on massive digital screens. She looked at the footage of her daughter, heard the mocking gasps of the women she had spent decades trying to impress, and her brain simply short-circuited. She let out a dramatic, breathless gasp, clutched her chest with both hands, and swooned backward, fainting theatrically into her gold Chiavari chair. Julian stood frozen near the bar, his mouth hanging open in dumbfounded shock, unable to comprehend how their perfect plan had disintegrated into a public execution. Winston was paralyzed on the stage. The spotlight had clicked back on, illuminating him perfectly as he stood just a few feet away from Desmond. The smug, arrogant patriarch who had just preached about black excellence and the sanctity of family was now standing under a glaring light while a massive video of his daughter's infidelity played on a loop right beside his head. I sat at the main family table perfectly still in my black gown, sipping my ice water. I watched Winston's face as the realization finally hit him. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a new profound terror, finally understanding that I had not come to sign his paperwork. I had come to watch the execution. Winston's initial paralysis shattered. The sheer magnitude of the public humiliation finally breached his impenetrable arrogance, replacing it with the explosive, reckless fury of a cornered predator. The veins in his neck bulged visibly against his starched white collar. He let out a raw, guttural roar that echoed through the microphone, still picking up ambient sound on the podium. He lunged across the stage toward Desmond. His fists were clenched tight, his face flushed purple with absolute, unfiltered rage. He looked ready to physically tear the billionaire apart for ruining his daughter and destroying his carefully constructed social masterpiece. Desmond did not flinch. He did not take a single step backward. He stood as immovable as a mountain, his dark eyes fixed coldly on the charging patriarch. The private security guards who had corralled the best man immediately pivoted, their hands reaching instinctively inside their tailored jackets to draw their weapons, but Desmond raised a single flat palm. He halted his men with a silent, commanding gesture, choosing to handle Winston entirely on his own. Winston stopped mere inches from Desmond, his chest heaving, saliva flecking his lips as he panted for breath. He raised his hand, pointing a trembling finger directly at Desmond's face. "You ruined my family." Winston screamed, his voice raw, tearing through his vocal cords and echoing across the silent, breathless conservatory. "You arrogant, disrespectful piece of trash. I will destroy you for this. I will ruin your life." Desmond simply stared at him. The billionaire leaned calmly into the crystal podium microphone, unaffected by the hysterical threats of a broken man. His voice resonated with chilling, absolute clarity through the towering glass venue. "Winston, before you attempt to defend your daughter's deeply compromised honor." Desmond advised, his tone conversational but dripping with lethal intent. "You should really worry about the $2 million you embezzled from your fraternity brothers sitting in this very room." The words dropped like a live grenade onto the polished black marble dance floor. The silence that followed was heavy, that thick and highly combustible. It took exactly 3 seconds for the reality of Desmond's statement to penetrate the minds of the elite guests. Winston's country club associates, the men he had golfed with, the prominent business leaders he had charmed into his exclusive, off-the-books investment portfolios suddenly processed the magnitude of the revelation. The shock over the bridal infidelity vanished, instantly replaced by the terrifying primal fear of lost wealth. A prominent federal judge sitting at table 4 stood up so fast his heavy dining chair crashed backward onto the marble floor. A wealthy real estate developer standing near the botanical waterfall slammed his fist down onto his table, shattering a crystal wine glass into a dozen sparkling shards. Dozens of men in expensive tuxedos leaped to their feet simultaneously. Outrage tore through the crowd like wildfire. Shouts demanding answers, furious accusations, and panicked questions escalated into a chaotic, deafening roar. The elite, dignified reception instantly dissolved into an angry, vicious mob. "Where is our money, Winston?" a corporate CEO bellowed from the back of the room, shoving past a group of terrified bridesmaids. Winston looked out at the furious faces of his investors. The men he had defrauded were advancing toward the stage, their expensive dress shoes marching relentlessly toward him. Their eyes held absolutely no mercy, only the promise of total financial and social ruin. The illusion of his impenetrable empire shattered into dust right before his eyes. Winston realized his massive Ponzi scheme was entirely exposed, laid bare under the bright, unforgiving lights of his daughter's ruined wedding. Self-preservation is a powerful, ugly instinct. Winston did not look at Vivian, who was still slumped dramatically in her chair, feigning a fainting spell to avoid the eyes of her humiliated peers. He did not look at Chloe, who was sobbing hysterically on the dance floor in her ruined designer gown, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. He did not look at Julian. who was currently backing away from the bar in sheer, unadulterated terror. Winston spun away from Desmond. He abandoned his family without a single second thought. He bolted off the side of the stage, his heavy footfalls thudding loudly against the wooden stairs. He shoved a bewildered waiter out of his path, sending a silver tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor in a spray of glass and sparkling wine. He made a desperate, pathetic break toward the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen, hoping to slip out through the service corridors, reach the valet parking, and vanish into the night before the mob could tear him apart. But Tara had promised an inescapable cage, and the trap was already fully sprung. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the night, loud and terrifying, cutting completely through the angry shouts of the mob inside the conservatory. The flashing red and blue strobe lights reflected off the towering 80-foot glass walls, turning the beautiful botanical garden into a surreal, spinning kaleidoscope of police colors. The massive glass double doors at the main entrance were thrown open with violent, synchronized force. The uninvited guests had arrived. Dozens of uniformed Atlanta Police Department officers stormed into the reception hall. They moved with aggressive tactical precision, fanning out across the room and forming a solid, impenetrable perimeter around the exits. Right behind them, a phalanx of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across the back marched down the central aisle. The sheer display of heavily armed law enforcement instantly silenced the furious wedding guests, freezing the angry mob in their tracks. Winston had his hands flat against the swinging kitchen doors, ready to push his way to freedom. He never made it. 2 federal agents and an APD detective intercepted him, stepping out from the dark shadows of the service hallway. They grabbed Winston by the shoulders, spinning him around with brutal, unceremonious force. They slammed the patriarch of the Wilson family face first against the heavy wooden kitchen doors. Winston Wilson, the lead detective, shouted, his voice cutting through the silent, breathless room with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon." A federal agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "And you are also being taken into federal custody for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and the operation of an illegal financial syndicate," the agent added, his voice dripping with professional disdain. Winston struggled, his pristine tuxedo jacket twisting awkwardly as they wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed like a gunshot in the quiet conservatory. The untouchable, arrogant tycoon was completely neutralized, reduced to a common criminal bleeding his dignity onto the floor in front of the very society he had worshipped his entire life. Across the room, Julian realized the perimeter was completely sealed. He watched his father being manhandled and handcuffed against the kitchen doors. Pure, unadulterated cowardice seized my husband. He turned his back on the raid, hunching his shoulders, attempting to blend into a group of terrified floral designers and slink out through a side emergency exit near the botanical displays. It was a pathetic, futile attempt. Special Agent Harris, the lead investigator Tara had contacted, spotted Julian immediately. He pointed a firm finger across the room, tracking my husband's cowardly retreat. "Secure the son," he ordered. 3 federal agents converged on Julian before he could even reach the exit door. They did not show him the polite deference he felt entitled to. They grabbed his arms, pulling him out of the crowd and spinning him around to face the center of the room. Julian let out a high, panicked yelp, his eyes darting frantically around the conservatory, desperately searching for a way out, searching for his mother, searching for anyone to save him. He finally looked at me, sitting perfectly still at the head table, and I simply watched him fall. "Julian Wilson," the agent stated, his voice booming with undeniable authority. "You are under arrest for felony credit card fraud, identity theft, and the unauthorized transfer of corporate assets." They slammed Julian down onto a linen-draped table, scattering white roses and crystal silverware to the floor. They wrenched his arms behind his back and secured the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. Julian began to weep. They were loud, ugly, hyperventilating sobs that echoed pathetically across the room. He begged the agents to let him go, frantically claiming it was a mistake, claiming he was just borrowing the money for the wedding, claiming he was going to put it all back. His extreme entitlement was utterly useless against the cold, hard steel currently binding his wrists. I sat at the main family table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I looked at the untouched glass of ice water in front of me. I watched Vivian, who had miraculously recovered from her fainting spell, shrieking at the officers to release her husband and son. I watched Chloe sitting on the floor, surrounded by her ruined dreams, crying into her hands. I watched Julian being hauled to his feet by federal agents, his face red and slick with tears. And I watched Winston, the man who had tried to cave my skull in with a piece of solid brass, being aggressively marched out the service doors in handcuffs. The execution was completely flawless. The fallout was spectacular, immediate, and completely inescapable. The morning after the raid, the Wilson family name was violently dragged across the front page of every major newspaper and completely dominated the local television broadcasts. The Botanical Garden arrests became legendary in Atlanta's elite circles, a cautionary tale of greed and hubris that people would whisper about for decades. Winston's trial was a swift, merciless affair. Special Agent Harris had built an airtight, bulletproof case. The meticulous financial ledgers Tara and I provided, combined with the unsealed St. Regis surveillance footage, painted a horrifying picture of a desperate, violent man willing to murder his own daughter-in-law to cover his fraudulent tracks. Winston was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated assault and massive corporate embezzlement. There was no leniency, no quiet plea deal, and absolutely no mercy from the judge. He was stripped of his custom Italian suits and forced into a standard-issue jumpsuit, his country club memberships officially revoked, and his reputation burned to ash. Julian did not fare much better. The bank records showing his brazen unauthorized wire transfers proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had engaged in felony wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. He was convicted and handed a harsh prison sentence of his own. Because he had zero legal access to my blind trust, he had absolutely no assets to leverage for a better defense attorney. Julian was left entirely bankrupt, completely drowning in his insurmountable cryptocurrency deficit and the crushing legal fees from his failed trial. His desperate attempts to call me from the county jail, begging for financial salvation, were swiftly and permanently blocked by my legal team. He had absolutely nothing left to his name. Chloe's high society dreams collapsed with breathtaking speed. Marcus, facing his own massive public humiliation and desperate to salvage whatever remained of his career, permanently obliterated their engagement the very moment he was released from police questioning. He packed up his luxury apartment and fled to another state, leaving Chloe completely isolated and publicly shamed. Atlanta's elite social circles operate on a strict, ruthless hierarchy, and the Wilson women were instantly, permanently blacklisted. Country club doors were locked to them. Charity gala invitations ceased to exist. Former friends refused to return their calls, treating them like social pariahs. With Vivian's bank accounts frozen solid and the massive unpaid wedding debts crashing down on their heads, they faced total financial ruin. Chloe, a woman who had never worked a single day in her life, was forced to accept a minimum wage retail job at a local shopping mall just to appease the aggressive collection agencies, hunting them down for the unpaid catering and venue bills. I occasionally heard rumors of her folding sweaters and taking verbal abuse from angry customers under harsh fluorescent lighting, a far cry from the diamond-draped princess she had pretended to be. Vivian was forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment, her days of hosting lavish garden parties entirely over. As for me, the healing process was steady, calm, and deeply rewarding. The physical wound on my head closed cleanly, leaving only a faint, fading scar hidden safely beneath my hairline. My emotional recovery was even more profound. Free from Julian's financial parasitism and the toxic, suffocating orbit of his family, I threw my entire focus back into my real estate development firm. 6 months after the arrests, my company secured a massive, highly coveted contract to completely redesign and revitalize a historic downtown commercial district. It was the largest, most ambitious project of my career, a sprawling development of luxury lofts, boutique storefronts, and elevated green spaces that would reshape the city's skyline. That single municipal contract effectively doubled my net worth, cementing my status as one of the most formidable, respected developers in the entire state. My business thrived unfettered by the dead weight of a husband who only sought to drag me down. Desmond and I did not ride off into the sunset as a romantic couple. We built something far more valuable and enduring. We forged a powerful, unbreakable platonic friendship and a highly lucrative business partnership. His private equity firm became the primary financial backer for my downtown development project, merging his immense capital with my architectural vision. We regularly attended charity galas and corporate dinners together, presenting a united front of absolute power and mutual respect. We had faced the absolute worst of high society greed, stared down violent extortion, and emerged victorious, bonded forever by a shared understanding of loyalty, integrity, and truth. 1 year after that fateful night at the Botanical Gardens, I found myself standing on the private stone terrace of my $900,000 Buckhead property. It was the exact same custom-built home Winston had violently tried to force me to surrender. The house belonged entirely to me, heavily fortified within its blind trust, untouchable and secure. I walked out to the edge of my pristine, illuminated swimming pool. The evening air was warm, filled with the fragrant scent of blooming jasmine and fresh rain. I held a delicate crystal glass of vintage red wine, watching the glowing blue water ripple gently in the night breeze. The quiet ambiance of the estate was a sharp, beautiful contrast to the chaos and screaming I had endured a year prior. I took a slow, savoring sip of the wine, feeling a profound, unshakable peace settle over my soul. I looked up at the clear night sky, taking a deep breath of the crisp air, and allowed myself a genuine, victorious smile. Never shrink yourself to fit into a family that only views you as an ATM. Sometimes the best way to deal with toxic people isn't to fight them, it's to step aside, protect your peace, and watch them destroy themselves.